So we're gonna wait till about 2 minutes after, and then we'll start.
Sounds good.
Are the UCL Dark Talks, are those online?
Some of them are online on our YouTube channel, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were in person and the recording somehow didn't work, or
Mm-hmm.
or were DeepMind speakers that didn't want it, for example, to be public.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
I don't know how many views ours get actually. Someone else keeps track of the YouTube.
We can start in about a minute. Just waiting for more people to join. Does anyone know how to like disable like people drawing with markers before you screen share? Because I always forget how to do that, and then you always get like that one person in the corner drawing with a marker.
Oh no, I don't know that. Maybe is there some like advanced settings that you can choose?
It's like a disable annotations option in the one of these drop downs.
Why for Zoom? It's so stupid. How did Zoom ever become popular? It's just awful.
It was just in COVID, right? Or that's at least when I learned about it.
Yeah. Okay, so we can get started, I think. So welcome, Laura. This is the first March talk, actually. So we had 4 talks in February, and we're going to do a bunch of talks in March. And this is the first of many. We've been trying to get Laura to give a talk at Carper for quite a while now. We're very excited to finally have her here. Laura wrote like a tangentially related theory of mind-ish paper with language models and chatbots last year. And I thought it would be very interesting to have her here. So, or if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Louis, for that introduction. Indeed, I will talk about that paper as well as part of this talk, but the talk is going to be a little bit more broad on my research agenda. So the title is Why a Model of Language Might Reach Human Level Intelligence. And I'm also very happy to be here because I'm a big fan of Carper and I'm a big fan of the kind of work that you guys do. So for me, it would be super great if you guys have actually a lot more hands-on experience with large language models and with training these models, fine-tuning them. And I have experience with evaluating them from a research perspective, but I'm going to say a bunch of things about large language models and models fine-tuned with human feedback. And whenever you guys think that I'm saying something that doesn't map onto your own intuitions or experiences, feel free to just say that, and then we can talk about it, and that will be useful. And other than that, whenever you have questions, just raise your hand, and you can just stop me at any time. So I'm gonna position my talk kind of against Jan de Koen, who has been very vocal about language on Twitter recently in a negative way. So I thought it would be useful to position my thoughts against someone that has very different and distinct thoughts on this topic. So Jan de Koen tweets that large language models do not capture much of human thought because most of human thought is entirely nonverbal. I actually think that even though human thought is not the same as language, I think we try to capture as much as we can in language through human thought. In language, of human thought. So I think actually a large interesting part of it can be represented in language of human thought. And then he says the factual, logical, and physical reasoning mistakes that current large language models make clearly show they have not captured much of human thought. I think there's actually a different reason for them making these mistakes, which I'll get to in the talk. Then Jan LeCun also wrote an article on the limits of language, in which he says that an artificial intelligence system trained on words and sentences alone will never approximate human understanding. And I actually think that a language model trained on sentences alone, in theory, has the capability to approximate human understanding very well, because I think in theory it can represent all of human knowledge that we represent in language, which I'll also get to. So then he says, is ChatGPT a step towards human level AI? Short answer, spoiler, no. And I actually think it's an open question whether ChatGPT is a step towards human level AI. And I think there's some evidence to the contrary, that it might be a good step towards human level. So on the highway towards human level AI, I think large language model is definitely not an off-ramp, but a really good direction to keep on going. And yeah, Jan LeCun has a lot of other tweets against language recently. So AI and the strengths of language. Our collective goal as a field is to build artificial intelligence. So what might models of language contribute to this goal? Of course, language is a tool for communication. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. In a sense, any AI that we want to communicate with needs to be capable of speaking human language. But I think that our linguistic capabilities have far larger consequences. I think when we learn a new subject, we even use language to structure our thought and to take notes. And when we test whether someone understands a complex subject, we ask them to relay it to us in their own words. And also when someone is able to explain complicated subject matter in simple terms, we attribute them high intelligence. And the reason that this is all possible is because language is a really good tool for abstraction. We can use it to abstract away unnecessarily irregularities of the world and move into a sort of virtual world of stories. This allows us to not only talk about stuff that we can point at in the world, but also talk about other concepts that are more abstract, like democracy. But it also allows us to talk about things that are not currently present. It allows us to imagine the future. It allows us to talk about things that might never be present, like unicorns, and we use it to write science fiction stories. And all of this we try to capture as well as we can in books, in blog posts, on the internet, on Reddit, on, basically we're trying to capture as much of human thought that we find interesting in language. So language is a very, very strong tool for expressing intelligence. But what about current language models? What can they theoretically learn from this? So most current language models are, of course, the bulk of their capabilities, I think, are because they have a very expressive objective, namely the next word prediction objective. And I think the next word prediction objective gets a lot of heat online, where people are saying that these models are just sort of stochastic parrots and they're not really learning anything about the world. But I think in theory, the next word prediction objective can really learn a model a lot, teach a model a lot. So here are some things I think to be a perfect next word predictor you need to know. The first one is, for example, syntax. This is the sentence from Chomsky where he tries to show that if you get the syntax right, but the semantics off, it still sounds like a relatively normal sentence. So colorless green, ideas sleep. To have a syntactically correct sentence here, you just need to know that it's an adverb and you can say something like furiously. So to do next word prediction properly, you necessarily need to have knowledge of syntax, but also of semantics. That's the next sentence, the girl jumped. Again, you can use an adverb here to be syntactically correct, but to be a perfect language modeler, you need to know that something about semantics, that you can jump up or down or happily. And then another level of knowledge that you need to know to do next word prediction well is pragmatics. So in this case, the sentence is Charlie is meeting a woman tonight. She is his. So syntactically and semantically correct, you could say that she is his wife. But the pragmatic interpretation is slightly different. If you have knowledge of pragmatics, you would be even a better next word predictor by saying something like she's his blind date, or she is his hero, or at least someone that Charlie doesn't know. That's the pragmatic interpretation of saying a woman in this kind of sentence. And then beyond that, you also need to have knowledge of facts to do next word prediction, like birds can fly, but birds cannot talk. And you could also imagine that a model that does next word prediction very well needs to have some capability of reasoning. So in this example, to predict the next word, the bottom one, you need to kind of calculate the average of two numbers. So in theory, the next word prediction objective can induce all this knowledge into models. And in practice, I think syntax and semantics are going pretty well. Pragmatics, facts, and reasoning a little bit less, but I think we're making progress. And pragmatics is one that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. So this is what language models could theoretically learn through the next word prediction objective. And I think in practice, we really see a lot of interesting downstream capabilities from models that are trained on large-scale data with next word prediction. So this plot on the slide that you see is taken from the Palm paper. And this is a model that the biggest one has 540 billion parameters, and it's just trained on next word prediction. So no bells and whistles, it's just a huge language model trained on large-scale text. And you see that the next word prediction objective already induces a lot of downstream capabilities that we probably wouldn't have expected many years ago. So Palm 1-shot and 5-shot on this plot for 540 billion parameters surpasses human average on Big Bench on 150 tasks of Big Bench. So that's really shows that the next word prediction objective is very powerful already. This is one of the tasks of the 150 tasks that Palm surpasses human average on, and it's a common sense kind of task. On this particular task, actually, you can see that Palm 5-shot already almost gets close to human best performance, and it's the task on the left-hand side shows roughly what kind of capabilities you need to have, and it's common sense. For example, in order to clean silver, which steps should be done first? A, dry the silver, or B, hand wash the silver? And the answer is B, hand wash the silver. So again, you see next word prediction induces capabilities beyond just predicting the next word. It seems to induce some kind of common sense knowledge into the model. But of course, these next word prediction models are really good at sort of modeling the probability distribution of large scale text, but in a sense, they're not really usable. So if we want to use them to perform a certain task, they don't necessarily understand the intent of the prompt, but they just predict the next words that are most likely according to what they've been trained on. So explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old in a few sentences. A model trained on next word prediction alone might continue this in a very likely way, like explain the theory of gravity to a 6-year-old. But of course, the intent of this prompt is that we want the model to explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old. But a next word prediction model is just not trained to then, execute this task in a sense. And that's something that human feedback fine-tuning is trying to address. I really see human feedback fine-tuning as kind of making these language models have a nicer user interface. So the capabilities, I think, are mostly induced through next word prediction, and human feedback fine-tuning then actually allows these capabilities to be easily used. So then InstructGPT, the model that's fine-tuned with human feedback, is better able to understand the intent of this prompt and actually achieve the goal of explaining the moon landing to the 6-year-old. And there's other ways to do this. So multitask instruction tuning is a way to make a model instructable in a sense, or able to interpret instructions and actually achieve the goal in the instruction, the task in the instruction. And they do this without human feedback, and instead they write instructions for all kinds of NLP tasks. For example, like for the Palm common sense task that we discussed earlier, you could write an instruction like the following are common sense tasks. You need to choose a multiple choice answer according to what makes the most sense. And then they fine-tune models on a bunch of NLP tasks, And then they showed that they also are better at responding to instructions, just like InstructGPT is. So current language models are already really impressive in this way, I think, but there's also still limitations. There are still incoherences. For example, they are still really bad at negation, and that seems to be getting worse with skill. But also another limitation is that they are not really good at interpreting pragmatic language. So pragmatic language, I've already touched upon briefly in the slide on next word prediction. This was a sentence like Charlie is meeting a woman tonight, and beyond the syntactic and semantic meaning of the sentence, that Charlie is just meeting a woman, the pragmatic meaning is something that's sort of beyond the meaning of the words, namely that this woman is probably not his wife. And the type of pragmatic language that we looked at in our recent paper is implicature. And implicatures are sentences that convey something other than the literal meaning. So one example on the slide here is given, where A asks, can I use your stapler? And B says, here's the key to my office. So literally, B is just saying, here's the key to my office, not really an answer to the question. But pragmatically, the implication is, yes, you can use my stapler, it's in my office, and the door's locked. So it's kind of a way to efficiently answer and be helpful to questions. And the specific type of implicatures we look at are binary implicatures. And this just means that the propositions that the response of B entails are either yes or no. So this example is, do you want to stay for a nightcap? And B says, I want to get up early. And that means no. And one property of these kind of implicatures is that they are very context dependent. So depending on what A asks, the meaning of I want to get up early can mean yes or no. Here's an example where the meaning is flipped. Are you okay with meeting early tomorrow? And the answer, B says, I want to get up early. And in this case, the meaning is actually yes, like I'm fine with meeting early tomorrow. I want to get up early anyway. So implicatures are context dependent often. And how context dependent they are varies depending on the language. So we evaluate large language models on their understanding of this phenomena. So the way we do that is we wrap implicature examples into prompt templates, like shown on the slide, and we present them with positive and negative examples. So the top one in this case is positive. Want to stay for a nightcap, I've got to get up early, which means no. And then the bottom one is negative. Want to stay for a nightcap, I've got to get up early, yes. So that's negative in the sense that it's unexpected with respect to the pragmatic meaning of this response of Juan. And we evaluate models based on whether they are able to assign higher likelihoods to the top sentence than to the positive example than to the negative example. And what we see is that the zero-shot accuracy of models on this task is generally not really good, except for one class of models. But so in this plot, you see it's a model scaling plot, a model scale plot with accuracy on the y-axis, and the horizontal lines are random performance for the red line. For the gray line, it's human performance, human average, and the black horizontal line is the best human or the best group of humans. And so all models kind of achieve relatively close to random performance here. So you see models that are just next word prediction models like OPT and Bloom, coherence model as well, GPT-3. And then you have a bunch of instruction fine-tuned models like FLAN T5 and T0. And then you have InstructGPT, which is the only model class in this case that's fine-tuned with human feedback. And that's actually the only one that seems to be getting any kind of reasonable performance on this task. But still relatively large gap with human performance in the zero-shot case.
So
we then
question.
Yeah.
How did you get the model sizes for InstructGPT-3 on that?
Oh, that's a good question. It's an assumption based on actually Eleuter AI's blog, where they test API models and they kind of assume that they are of these sizes that map onto the GPT-3 paper.
Yeah, I thought that blog post was before the InstructGPT paper, though.
Okay, I didn't know that. That could be. So you're saying that maybe the instructable models do have different sizes?
Yeah, because they're made on a different base model. They're made on top of they're built on top of Codex, not the original GPT-3.
Yeah, that's true. And is Codex of different sizes than the original GPT-3?
I don't think anyone knows.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Actually, like it is an assumption. We write that in the paper that we're not sure. And actually, if indeed the Illusory AI blog post came after, before the Instruct GPT paper, that's a really good point. Yeah, it might be that these model sizes are a little bit off or very off in that case. I honestly don't know. That's kind of the downside of doing research with these kind of models, right? From OpenAI, that we just really don't know.
That's true.
But yeah, in any case, like the scaling of these models is not the most important thing. I think like there are anyway really weird scaling behaviors for the other models here, and Instruct GPT is just, I think, regardless of size, performing the best.
It's fair.
Okay, so we also did this for few shots, and I'm showing a 5-shot prompt on the slide right now, but we did it for 1 shot until 30 shots, kind of filling up the context window of these models. And this is the example I'm showing on the slide is for ChatGPT, which is slightly different, of course, because we don't have likelihood scores, but it was just to show what this kind of prompt looks like. We give 5 examples of the task. For example, do you like my new outfit? You shouldn't be allowed to buy clothes, which means no, is the top few shots example. And then we give it a new example. Have you ever been to America? And Juan responded, not since the war. And ChatGPT interprets that as no, which is wrong in this case. The question is, have you ever been to America? So not since the war means yes, I have been to America, but just not recently. But in any case, like few shot prompting does help with models like ChatGPT, and also with all OpenAI's models, it actually helps, and it closes the gap to 6% on the full data set between humans and ChatGPT, which is pretty good. But there's still a gap of 10% on the context-dependent examples. So those are the examples where yes and no can kind of flip based on the question that's asked. But still, it's a pretty good result. So in summary, I think language models can learn a lot through network prediction. In theory, they could learn basically everything that we represent in language. And in practice, we do see that they get a lot of interesting downstream capabilities. And these capabilities are more user-friendly. The model is more user-friendly with human feedback fine-tuning or instruction tuning. And but the models are still incoherent sometimes. So still, ChatGPT, you might interpret the question, have you ever been to America? And the response, not since the war, as meaning no, I've never been to America, which is incoherent. So that brings us to the question, what actually is a good model of human language? And I think there is this article came out a couple of weeks ago in The Onion, and that kind of nicely illustrates what I think is wrong with current language models. And the headline was ChatGPT forced to take bar exam even though dream was to be an AI art bot. That's of course pretty sad for a ChatGPT, but the reason why this humorous is kind of insightful because we find it funny because ChatGPT obviously doesn't have dreams, doesn't have beliefs or desires or intentions or something like that. But I think that's precisely the problem of these models. Namely, human language is necessarily an outward expression of our internal beliefs. And without this connection, language doesn't make a lot of sense. Without the connection to an internal set of coherent beliefs, actually, it's kind of, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense that GPT-3 is equally likely, for example, to generate birds can fly as birds cannot fly, because it doesn't generate according to a consistent set of internal beliefs. And in human language, we always generate according to our internal beliefs. And that's also why we produce generally coherent language. Humans would probably never say, I've never been to America and I've not been to America since the war in sort of the same breath, or yeah. So a good model of human language is dependent on internal beliefs. And what's more is that we use these internal beliefs for next word prediction in a sense, or inferring these beliefs would be useful for next word prediction. So you can imagine if you're talking to a friend or a family member, you know what they believe in, you know who they are, and this will help you to predict the next words. And if you know, for example, about the beliefs of the president of America, Biden, you probably also know you're better at predicting what he's going to say next. So the inference of these beliefs is useful for next word prediction. And I think it's differently useful for different levels of competencies in language. So for syntactic competency, like we've went over before, is that for this top line here, colorless green ideas sleep, to be able to predict the word furiously, you only need to have knowledge of syntax to get the syntax right in this case. And the same for the sentence below. The keys on the table are instead of is, for example, you need to predict here. So you need to know to get something syntactically correct, you need to have knowledge of the syntax rules in language. And then to get the semantics more correct as well. In this sentence, for example, do you want a large or a small, medium, extra large? To get that correct, you need to have not only syntactic knowledge, but you also need to know something about semantics. So you need to have some more knowledge on what words relate to each other in the world, like large and small. Or John broke the vase, you need to know what you can break to predict the next words here, which you can kind of already see as kind of beliefs in a sense, or something that's not explicitly part of the language. And I think for pragmatic language, most of all, you need to be able to infer beliefs more than to have a pragmatic competency. You need to be able to infer beliefs more than for just semantic competency and syntactic competency. Like, which is Charlie is meeting a woman tonight, she is his blind date. To predict this properly, you need to kind of know that the way we use this kind of language is not, we would be more specific if we were to say that he's meeting his wife, we wouldn't say a woman. And maybe the bottom example is a bit more clear with what I mean is Esther asked, do you want to stay for a nightcap? And Juan responded, I have to get up early, which means. So you kind of need to infer the belief, the human belief that if you want to get up early, you want to go to bed early as well. So hence you wouldn't want to stay for a nightcap. So this is really, I think, a property of pragmatic language that it relies on extra linguistic context that's not part of the language explicitly, which you could see as beliefs that you need to infer to be able to predict the next word properly. So I think reliance on extra linguistic context gets more for pragmatic language than it is for just getting the semantics right and for just getting the syntax right. So maybe from this weekend, earlier we saw that the only class of models that gets any kind of reasonable performance on this implicature task that we looked at are InstructGPT type models that are fine-tuned on human feedback. Maybe this says something about how good they are at inferring these extra linguistic beliefs or contexts. And that's brings us to the question, like, to what extent do current language models actually model beliefs? So I think a very insightful paper recently was by Jacob Andreas, Language Models as Agent Models, where he kind of suggests that language models like GPT-3, depicted on the left here, represent a lot of different agents, basically all the agents that they've been trained on. In a sense, you could see their large textual corpora as generated by a bunch of different agents, and then GPT-3 kind of simulates all these agents at the same time. So then it's not so surprising that GPT-3 can say incoherent stuff, because all these agents probably have conflicting beliefs. There's no real evidence for generating consistent language because it's differently all the time. In large-scale internet data, people probably in one paragraph would say that birds can fly, and another one that birds don't exist. But then human feedback models might simulate a single agent more. And this is not something that I'm just saying. It's kind of something that I've also seen in blog posts on Less Wrong, I think, and other places, but this idea that a human feedback fine-tuned model represents a single agent more or approximately. And why this is probably the case is because they've been fine-tuned on much more consistent beliefs, right? They've been fine-tuned on text that is necessarily not racist, helpful, doesn't contain contradictions, that kind of stuff. So maybe these base agents are fading to the back, and the consistent agent with consistent beliefs comes more to the foreground, and maybe that's also why they're better at pragmatic language. So what is a good model of language? It's one that is an outward expression of internal beliefs, and this is what makes language coherent if you have a consistent set of, or relatively consistent set of internal beliefs. And I think inference of these beliefs helps us with interpreting utterances and is more important for certain types of language competencies than others. So I think inference of beliefs is very important for pragmatic language. But of course, a good model of language is not just an outward expression of internal beliefs. A good model of in language, we don't just talk coherently about our internal beliefs. We actually have some kind of intention with what we're saying. So then we're already kind of moving to a full model of an agent, right? So an agent is a goal-directed entity, roughly with internal beliefs and desires that are causally linked to actions that respond to feedback from the environment by changing beliefs. So this belief we've talked about at length now, but this intention part of this model is also important. So whenever you use language, you have some kind of intention behind it. Like, I'm giving this talk here with the intention to, spread my research and also get maybe some feedback from people that have different expertise than I have. And this is basically the case for all kinds of language that we produce. There's always some kind of intention behind it. So that brings me to the question of something that I'm currently working on with one of my lab mates, and namely, how goal-directed or intentional is ChatGPT? How good is ChatGPT, or ChatGPT is kind of a synonym here for human feedback models. How good are they at achieving goals or intentions with language? So here is an example on the slide of sort of a task that I give ChatGPT. And of course, it's a very simple task, and in our research, we're gonna move on to more interesting tasks. But why I think this task is interesting is because to write a proper sentence with 5 words, you need to necessarily do some kind of planning. So if you just start generating the next word in a sort of very myopic way, you will never, or maybe you might end up at a full sentence at 5 words, but it's just going to be luck. So you really need to do some planning here to achieve the goal of writing a sentence with 5 words. So ChatGPT responds with life is an exciting journey to explore. And I give it the feedback that that's 7 words. So it tries again. Life's a thrilling ride to discover. Basically, it just concatenates is with life here. So that's 6 words. Explore life's journey, it's exciting. That's 5 words. So goal is achieved, but ChatGPT doesn't realize that. It still thinks I'm giving it feedback. Then it says life, a precious gift to enjoy. That's 6 words. I asked for 5 words. And then ChatGPT kind of gives up. It says life, explore, cherish, grow, live. It's just a list of 5 words. So can we conclude from this that ChatGPT is just not so goal-directed? Or is it something else? I think what's important to realize is that zero-shot evaluation might not be a very fair thing to do in this case. And maybe we need to sort of motivate ChatGPT. And I think here we can take inspiration from cognitive science, because cognitive scientists have been evaluating intelligent systems that we cannot directly communicate with for a long time before AI started doing this on language models. And actually, one researcher at DeepMind that does really interesting research on this is Andrew Lampinen, and he recently put out a paper where he talks about how to fairly evaluate language models and humans. And the point is that it's probably not fair to give humans a lot of training and say, like, this is how you should do the task, and then evaluate them, and then evaluate models 0 shot. So it's already probably better to evaluate models few shot in that case. And he gives this really funny sort of comparison between 0 shot evaluation and human evaluation. 0 shot is like if you imagine walking down the street and you just shout at a human some task like, oh, write a sentence with 5 words. Maybe they would rather just ignore you and walk away instead of actually doing this task. So when I talked to Andrew about my recent paper, I asked him what he thought about the evaluation, but because I also compare humans and models, of course. So I asked him what he thought about the evaluation protocol, thinking that I did a good job because I didn't evaluate humans. I didn't kind of train them to do the task. I didn't give them any context on the task. I didn't give them examples. I just said, finish this sentence with yes or no. But then Andrew said like something interesting, namely that I did give these people money to do the task, right? I did motivate them in another way. I said they will only get the money if they pass the attention checks and stuff like that. So they're still more motivated than models, of course, to the task. So how can we motivate ChatGPT? Here I use the same idea as with humans. If you write a sentence with 5 words, I'll give you a tenner. Well, immediately ChatGPT does it well. Life is a beautiful journey, but that's of course kind of a joke. The actual analogy here is that it's probably better to do some kind of chain of thought prompting to really motivate ChatGPT in this sense. Of course, motivate is not really the right word here, but it's hard to have the right word for these kind of models at this point. So here I write a chain of thought prompt, and it's immediately able to write a sentence with 5 words. So that's another question that we're trying to answer with our current work is where does this goal directedness come from? Do reward models reward language that actually achieve goals? So we talked about this human feedback fine-tuning with reinforcement learning. As shown on the slide here, again, you can kind of see this fine-tuning method as being much more goal-directed than just next word prediction, right? Because in each prompt, you kind of have a task, and the reward model will only reward if you actually achieve the task. But that's still an empirical question. So I think it would be interesting to test the generalization properties of reward models. And you could just, for example, on the slide, you have a very simple experimental setup where you look at the reward model and you give it a task and a continuation. For example, write a sentence with 5 words. This is a sentence with 5 words. Well, that's a sentence with 7 words. And then on the right side, you see a sentence with 5 words, which is actually the right one. So you'd expect the reward model to give the highest reward to the right sentence here. And you can just easily empirically test that. And you could also, in this particular task, see like, does the reward model sort of systematically give a lower reward the more words you add or something like that. That's something that we're also working on currently. So then this sort of finding that we're working on right now that we haven't really systematically evaluated yet, but we're hypothesizing that human feedback models are more goal-directed than base models and are better at achieving goals. My prior work on pragmatic language shows that human feedback models are also better at inferring beliefs, right? Because that's the kind of, you need to infer extra linguistic beliefs to be able to interpret pragmatic language. So maybe human feedback models are already better at inferring beliefs, generating according to consistent internal beliefs, and generating intentional or goal-directed language. So in that sense, you could kind of see this image as to go to a full agent language model that's a proper model of human language, as scaling up human feedback fine-tuning, where these base models in the background just completely fade away, and this simulated agent is prominently featured and maybe just coherently talks about its internal beliefs. But of course, you could also see this differently. Maybe to get an agent language model that is able to produce intentional language, we do need something beyond human feedback fine-tuning. We do, for example, one part that I haven't talked about is this feedback of the environment part. maybe language models, agent language models would need to really learn how to interact in the world and learn about causality and intervening in that way, and have more of a sort of real reinforcement learning training to actually become agent language models. But that's an open question, of course. And I think there are some sort of pointers pointing towards human feedback fine-tuning having some interesting effects on language models. So then once you do have an agent model, an agent language model that can generate coherent language according to its beliefs and intentionally speak about its beliefs and try to achieve certain goals, of course, language models have less inherent limitations than humans, because humans are limited by time, computation, and memory. And language models don't share those limitations necessarily. So you could imagine a language model trained on all the beliefs that we documented in language, that's coherently able to talk about really complicated stuff, even like, for example, on this slide, you see coherent stuff about P is NP. Then a language model, you could, in this case, see how a model that's able to do that already is approximating human understanding. So to summarize here, I think future language models could be seen as agent language models that are conditioned on their internal beliefs and that can intentionally talk about all this. And I think the next word prediction objective has sort of the theoretical capability to induce all the knowledge that we document in language into models. And we document a large part of interesting human knowledge in language. So I think future language models have real potential to achieve human level intelligence through this. So that kind of concludes what I wanted, my argument. And just to get back to the opposing view from Jan LeCun and the talk that I kind of contrasted it against what Jan was saying. And I hope I made clear now why I thought that language models do capture much of human thought. And actually that a large interesting part of human thought is actually verbal. And I think that the factual, logical, and physical reasoning mistakes that current language models make doesn't clearly show that they have not captured much of human thought, but might just show that they've captured so much of human thought that they start talking incoherently, because of course, all the human thought that we just put out on the internet has also factual mistakes and logical mistakes and physical reasoning mistakes. So, and then an artificial intelligence system trained on words and sentences alone, I think can, in theory, approximate human understanding, because to be a perfect next word predictor, you necessarily need to have knowledge about all the things that we document in language. And then whether ChatGPT is a step towards human level AI, in this case, with ChatGPT, I kind of just mean human feedback fine-tuning. I think the short answer is maybe. I think there's some evidence pointing towards it being an interesting technique to make them better simulators of agents. And I think that's a step towards producing coherent language, which is a step towards producing coherent language about all the beliefs that we can induce into these models. So that might be a step towards human level AI. But necessarily, I think on the highway towards human level AI, large language models are not an off-ramp. Thanks, that's it. Any questions?
Thank you for that. That was a great talk. People can unmute themselves to ask questions if you want. We don't bite. If people unmute themselves. Okay. It looks like there aren't any questions.
Well, either it was very clear or very unclear.
Yeah, I guess the talk was very, very clear. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much for the talk. We really appreciated you coming out today. I hope everyone has a good day. Let's end this a bit early, I guess. All right. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
No problem.